All right. Hello, everyone. I am Jonathan Perle. I am over at WVU Medicine. I am a clinical child adolescent psychologist. But I guess more important for this, I have been studying about and teaching about and researching about technology and healthcare for many, many years, going back to my dissertation, which was an ungodly amount of time ago. But more specific to today, one of the things I've been talking a lot about and kind of teaching about the ethics and legality of is artificial intelligence. So today, what I want to focus in on, because we only have a little bit of time, is AI chatbot and companion bot use among behavioral health patients. So we'll be going over the basics of usage, some of the benefits and risks, and then kind of next steps, and including the legality, because there's a lot of things that are changing. So just from a disclaimer point up front, I can spend hours on any one of these topics, and I promise I will try to stay in the time and not talk your ears off. But obviously, this is very, very complex and gets very, very dense. So my job today is just to talk about an overview. So I understand if I can't talk about everything, I'm happy to kind of go into a little bit more detail during the Q&A, but I just want to say that up front. Just to keep things moving along. Okay, two main objectives today. By the end of today, I hope that at the minimum anyway, you can identify at least two benefits and two limitations of the use of AI in behavioral healthcare services. So to do that, a couple different things we're going to talk about today. We're going to start with a very brief history of AI integration with healthcare, because while people talk about how it's this new thing, wave of the future, it ain't that new. It's been around for quite a while. We're going to define what AI actually is, despite the fact that it's ubiquitous, it's everywhere, everyone talks about it. It can mean a lot of different things. And AI is an umbrella term. It's like saying I do healthcare. There could be a lot of things under that umbrella. Where they're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the benefits and limitations, especially the limitation, because that's where a lot of the gray areas a lot of people are not aware of. So I want to make sure we're on the same page. We're going to shift gears to talk about the uses of AI among adults and youth. Really, a lot of this is going to be on kiddos because that's where a lot of the research is, because that's what's getting national and international attention. There's way less work on adults, but I'll try to pull what's available just to give you a comparison point. We're then going to talk about some of the risks for adults, youth, developmentally vulnerable populations. And finally, we're going to round out by talking about some of that legal stuff that we talked about. Couple disclaimers and disclosures. I don't have any specific disclaimers or disclosures for this specific presentation. Um, but I do want to say up front that I'm very clearly biased. I think AI can be very helpful as a tool and as an augment. I don't think we're kind of ready for prime time in terms of complete standalone, but I do think it's helpful, and that bias probably comes across. But my job today is to talk about both the good and the bad. I do use pictures throughout, try to make a dense topic a little bit more entertaining. My legal department has told me I just need a disclaimer. I am not claiming ownership of any of these popular media pictures. They are copyrighted the respective owners. And finally, there are three pictures which I'll identify, I'll point out that I used AI to create because I didn't find that AI liked. But AI was not used in any other part of this presentation, not in the review, the creation. It's all me for good or bad. So first things first, I just want to kind of throw this out there and I want you to think for a second. When someone says AI, what do you think of? Because when we actually surveyed people, what we find is you get a ton of this, like a ton of science fiction. You get Johnny Five and 3PO and R2. You also get a whole bunch of old movies, like I hope someone's old enough to remember Lost in Space and the old 50s Forbidden Planet movies. But you get a ton of this. You get a lot of science fiction, and you get an equal number of people who go the other side of science fiction with Megan and Terminators and Hals and Ultrons. And you just get a ton of this where we are one bad day away from Skynet launching and taking over the world. You do, in fact, get a lot of this. But you get a very small subset of people who say, wait a minute, hold on. Isn't my phone AI? Doesn't my car have AI? What about Clippy from like Microsoft Office from the 90s? Aren't those AI? And the answer is yeah, all the above is AI. And I think you can see here that this goes back a very, very long way. So the question then becomes, is AI really new? And as I mentioned earlier, no, it isn't. I was actually just reading a paper in Lancet and another in JAMA earlier today where it still talks about how AI is the wave of the future. It's the newest thing. But really, if you trace back kind of the terminology of AI just as a phrase, it really goes back to the 50s. So John McCarthy is commonly credited as coining the term artificial intelligence back at the Dartmouth Summer Research Project. A bunch of really smart people got together, wrote some papers, and in 1956, they released a joint paper by McCarthy, Minsky, Rochester, and Shannon, coining the term artificial intelligence. But as it relates to behavioral health, it was almost a decade later that we finally got some proof of concept. MIT Weizenbaum out there created ELIZA, which is widely credited as the first or one of the first AI chatbots specifically for mental health. So what Weizenbaum did was code basically Rogerian psychotherapy into a chatbot where you can ask it questions, it can respond to you, a lot of reflective practices to go along with that Rogerian therapy. But it was essentially one of the first chatbots out there, which is why I think it's pretty funny when I see all these chatbots out there marketing themselves as one of the first mental health chatbots that was created in, 19 or 2025. Not exactly super new, right? Now, over time, a lot happened, but just for the sake of time, let's fast forward to last year. The American Psych Association's Pulse Survey surveyed its people and found that roughly 1 in 3 are using AI at least monthly, if not weekly, if not daily. And you can see from 2024 to 2025, these numbers are only increasing. Now, not super high numbers individually. When you start putting them together, again, 1 in 3 are using this pretty consistently. So what about psychiatrists? Let's have a comparison point. They did it a little bit on the negative side, but 53% have not used AI in their practice, but that leaves roughly 1 in 2 that has. So this is a pretty large number of people that are using AI. And it really comes down to semantics and how you define AI, because I would argue 100% of people who were surveyed were using AI. If you factor in electronic health records that has AI built in, Microsoft Office for documentation, telehealth platforms now have a lot of AI built in. So it really depends on what kind of AI we're talking about and how you're quantifying it and how you're asking people. But from a basic standpoint of asking people directly, are you using AI specifically in your practice? Roughly a third to half are using it, depending on what field we're talking about. So I've been talking about AI a lot. What is it? Like, what are we actually talking about? Well, unfortunately, it's like saying I do healthcare. There's no simple, singular definition because it can do a ton of things. And depending on what you're looking at, different organizations, governmental organizations, and medical organizations, they all overlap, but there's also, they branch out and have specific things that they highlight. And I just want to kind of point out one thing before we move on. They all call it artificial intelligence, except AMA and the American Psychiatric, who follows AMA, who call it augmented intelligence to illustrate that it is not ready for standalone. It should augment human services and general services that have a psychologist, psychiatrist, social worker, physician involved. So I kind of like that notion. But at the same token, most places use artificial intelligence. So just if you look at the AMA, that's why it's different. However, for today, the definition I want to use of AI is the theory and development of computer systems that can perform tasks that typically require human involvement. We're talking reasoning, prediction, decision making, creation, all that kind of stuff. The thing is, it varies by a ton of factors. That's why AI can be so broad. Three biggest ones: complexity, capacity, and then independence from humans. So the complexity, it depends on what you're asking. I asked AI, I asked a chatbot to create a pug surfing on a surfboard in the Caribbean to annoy my wife when we were on vacation. And it did a really good job because it knows what a pug looks like. It knows the Caribbean. It knows a surfboard. Okay, I want you to consolidate all medical research to create a cure for colon cancer. That's a little bit harder. Maybe can't do that as well because there's too many variables, right? This also relies on capacity. We've seen these data farms or data centers, these huge places that have a lot of servers, a lot of units, liquid cooling. In fact, I think it was China that's actually building an AI center under the ocean because it has automatic cooling built in. They don't have to pay extra, which is pretty smart. But the point is, can the system actually handle what it's being asked to do? And maybe, maybe not. And I know it's not specifically AI directed, but a couple of years ago, we were doing a bootstrapping study, which means we were replicating data over and over and over again, millions of times. And the computer overheated and caught fire. In other words, the capacity wasn't there, which is why a lot of these AI centers are popping up because we need larger and larger and more complex systems for them to work right. It also depends on what degree of independence you want from humans. And this is a whole different discussion that we're not going to open that can of worms today, but we are getting more and more sophisticated where humans have to have less and less interaction with them. So how much human interaction are necessarily needed for this to function appropriately? Now, before we go any further, I just want to make mention of how it's learning because this is super, super important for some of the stuff we're going to talk about. This gets very, very complicated, but on a very simplified level. AI is using machine learning. There are neural networks that mimic the brain and a lot of other jargony stuff. But for what we want to talk about, we care about large language models. LLMs are essentially the database that AI is pulling from. It's what it learns from and what it extrapolates from, okay? LLMs can be based on the internet, all websites. It can be based on just textbook, just peer-reviewed literature, just EHRs. You can feed in 200 of your neuropsych of forensic reports and make your own LLM if you want to. But it's a double-edged sword. The larger the LLM, the more it can extrapolate and predict what comes next because there's a lot of data, right? The problem is that means that you have less control over it because it's so large. The smaller the LLM, the more you can control what's in there, but the less it can extrapolate and learn from it. Therefore, it could be prone to more errors or just saying, I don't know. So it's kind of it's double-sided. Because this can be kind of complicated, I asked AI to create an image for me because I don't like the ones out there saying, hey, simplify LLM so I can teach about it. And unfortunately, with Gemini, this is what it created, which is not simple in my opinion. So I asked it to simplify it more, and it just made a new picture. So I figured this was a little too complicated. So I asked ChatGPT, okay, act like I'm a 5-year-old and teach me about LLMs. And this is what it created. So way more simple. You put the input in, tell me about dolphins. The LLM processes it and then spits out the output that dolphins are intelligent marine mammals. So that on a very simplified level is what it's doing. Okay. So with that said, what are the benefits of AI in healthcare? And they are numerous. First things first, there are in fact reduced wait times for information and services because there's 24/7 access. So if I'm a healthcare practitioner, I get off work and nobody's available, but I need to know about a certain condition, a super rare genetic condition. I can look it up. I can ask AI to help consolidate information to give me the high points of what I need to know to be able to talk about it. If I'm a patient, maybe I'm on a work schedule or I have a family schedule that doesn't allow me to attend services as much as I want to. Or I just want basic information. Or I've known people who just need to find services. Where do they exist? I can't find them. The internet is a scary place sometimes. And quite frankly, I can tell you our website is not exactly super intuitive either. So it's very hard to find services sometimes. This can be very helpful and available 24/7. It can also give you access to interventions and assessments too. Before we take out the pitchforks, because I know people have strong opinions, we'll talk about the limitations in a second. But it is, in fact, a benefit that we just are not able to reach all the people we need to reach. This does provide a viable alternative, even if it's a stopgap or even if it's for basic services or information without the higher level stuff. It can be quite helpful. It can also help with diagnostics and treatment support. It can help consolidate large amounts of information. I want you to summarize all of exposure-based therapy and tell me how to do it. I want you to review all the literature on Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and anxiety and give me a summary of it. It can also help improve diagnostics because it can review the entire health record, all the tests, all the write-ups, all the stuff, and it can give it. In fact, research has shown that it can be quite effective in doing that. In fact, equal to humans for the diagnostics because humans are prone to errors and missing information, especially if there's thousands upon thousands of pages in the EHR. You might miss something. There's also the potential for automation of screening, triaging, and assessment. This is something I've become interested in. Obviously, it can help give rating scales and interpret them and write up reports, but I'm interested in the screening and the triaging because we have a lot of people, especially in West Virginia, I get a lot of people who can't really read and write very well. So the intake forms are kind of flawed. But if they can talk to an avatar that's basically programmed to not go off script, it's not generative, it reads word for word what I type. It can be an audio essentially. It can be an intake where someone can talk to somebody. It can identify keywords or phrases that are high risk, and that could bypass the mailing back and forth and sitting on someone's desk. So I think that could be a benefit. It can automate interventions, be done independently, which again, we'll talk about the limitations in a second. And then automation of documentation. This is the one that most people care about. They call them medical scribes. So they're scribes, they can listen, they can then translate, and they can spit it out into a note. So these can be quite helpful, especially at reducing time for documentation, which I don't know about you, but most people I know, the bane of everyone's existence. It can help support research. Not only can it do lit reviews, but it can also help write stats code and help run the code and help interpret the stats, which if you have people who are required to do stats for promotion, but don't feel comfortable with statistics, it can be a nice helper to go along with that. It can also help with teaching and supervision. We can use it to help create curriculum, PowerPoint presentations. We can use it to create flashcards, note cards, tests. It can help score tests. It can help score things. It can help give feedback on those things. And all of this together can optimize workflows and operational efficiency. In English, this means we're reducing burnout because we're spending less time on those menial tasks and we can focus, work up to your degree, they say. How can I focus on the things that are more important to me that really require more work than focusing on the kind of extra stuff? Now, obviously, the extra stuff is important, but how can we harness this to reduce the burden and therefore, in theory, reduce burnout? And finally, I see in the literature a lot that AI is, in theory, unbiased. And I don't think this is a good way of putting it. I think it's non-reactive because it's definitely biased, which we'll talk about. What I mean by non-reactive is if I'm doing a therapy or an assessment or an intake, let's say, and someone says, "Hey, I raped somebody last week or I murdered somebody." Most people have some kind of a expression, even if it's nonverbal. Oh, okay, or oh, or you know, there's a reaction which could be off-putting to people, whereas AI does not do that because it's just computing data. So I don't know if I call it unbiased. That is what a lot of the literature says, but I would say it's non-reactive. And I'll explain more about what I mean in a second.
You have a question in the chat. It says, does it matter which LLM you use? Broadly
You,
speaking, Gemini versus ChatGPT.
so those are proprietary. Nobody has any idea what's included. So no. My suggestion is use both. My suggestion is use multiple and don't rely on one. See the overlap, and then you have to make an ultimate decision. You shouldn't be relying on those anyway, but you can use both. Get it? I just use both. I just use Gemini, Copilot, and ChatGPT this morning trying to help me find journals for a paper that we need to submit. And I got three different answers from three different places, and all of them had good information. So it really just depends on where it is. Um, the other thing I would say is when you're using the LLMs, just be careful to not put anything too personal. We actually had an issue recently where students were putting some information into ChatGPT, which is a HIPAA nightmare. So you have to be very careful and not put anything that could be considered HIPAA compliant. Hope that answered that. Okay, so let's shift gears. Lots of benefits. Now let's take a deeper dive a little bit into the limitations, which are the ones that require just a little bit more detail because they're a little bit more complicated. Number one, we don't know a lot. AI is still its infancy, even though it's been around for a while. When it comes to healthcare, we're really talking about only a couple, a decade or two of really studying it. We need a lot more research on short and long-term study, both proximal and distal. In other words, does it work now? What about longitudinal compared to treatment as usual? We also need research on efficacy and effectiveness. Efficacy are those randomized control trials. I can tell you it's work because I'm controlling everything. Effectiveness is real life, though. I can't control it. Okay, so efficacy is like I want to assess only 18 to 22-year-old, males and females or whatever with anxiety only. No medications, no other treatments, no nothing. Whereas effectiveness is I have someone come in diagnosed with 50 things, they're on three different meds, trying two different treatments. It's real life. I can't control it. I think ideally all of these things align in the same direction of having improvement, but we don't know. And oftentimes variables come in that don't lead to that. So we need to know not only does it have it, but also what does it vary by? Like, what are the factors we need to consider as clinicians to make sure that we're functioning appropriately? So we need more research, but I figure now's a good time just to pump the brakes for a second and tell you what does the research say about some of the things I was just talking about? Well, the information consolidation, reviewing the literature, reviewing the EHR. We know it is only as good as the prompt, and we know that writing prompts is almost like an art form unto itself. If you're too specific, you limit yourself. If you're too broad, it's not really doing what you want to, so it takes a little bit. That makes it really difficult to study because all prompts can be different. The issue is that we don't know what is included or not included when you do these reviews. So if I say condense this literature or look at someone's EHR and tell me what are the common themes in terms of diagnostics, we don't know what's being included or weighed more or weighed less. So that's kind of one of the biggest concerns we've been having with this. When it comes to assessment, fully fledged automated assessments, the verdict is out on how good they can be because they're just not well studied. But we do know to review things and predict diagnosis, it is actually quite good. And it's actually, in some cases, superior at predicting than humans, according to some of the research. So that is probably the highest point. Interventions, not as good. Most of the research to date has focused on anxiety, depression, and stress. While it has high satisfaction, actual outcomes are mild to moderate at best, even in some of the good studies. There's no treatment as usual comparison. There's very few controls, if any. And quite frankly, most places have just said that, not as good as a human right now. So if you're going to use it, it should be a supplement, not a standalone. We're just not there yet. It's not ready for prime time, so to speak. The one that everyone cares about, the scribes. Don't kill me on this one, but they're pretty good. They're about, roughly 92% accurate according to research. That then leaves a little bit of error. That's the problem. They're not foolproof. They are prone to deletions, omissions, like missing stuff, attributing things to the wrong person if there's multiple people talking, structural issues. So it does take time to be able to review those to make sure they're being pretty accurate to what you want them to say. And that's a decision that everyone has to make because I can tell you, I have a lot of smart phrase and smart text. I can type it and use the smart phrase faster than if I would using a scribe to then review the scribe information. So it really just depends on how quick you are at some of the things, but it could save a lot of time. But it's not foolproof. You do have to proof it because it is prone to some errors still. All of them. I have yet to see one that actually is error free. Um, Not going to name any companies per se, but again, when you look at the research, when you look at data, so far, the ones that are tested are not error free, and a lot of them are not really super tested. And if they are, the data is not public. So it's hard to tell. Now, what I just said before, and we don't know, leads me to the first big issue. It's called the black box phenomenon of essentially, we don't know what most AIs are doing because it's not transparent. And even if it is transparent, it's really hard to interpret what the AI actually does unless you're kind of a computer scientist, so to speak. So we don't know what we don't know. We don't know what it's emphasizing. We don't know what it's minimizing. That could be a problem if you want accuracy, right? The other issue is that it can only know what it knows from the LLM. That means AI currently, this might change, are prone to hallucinations. So this used to be called AI psychosis. There's a second one we're going to talk about in a second. But what this means is that AI will make stuff up. I can tell you, I work with a lot of regulators in the United States and Canada. There's an increasing number of complaints and reports against people because people are using this, practitioners are using this to summarize laws, especially for cross-state, cross-country practice. And the AI has been prone to making stuff up. I have seen myself cite, I've written so many more books and papers that I ever realized I did because it's telling me that I did more than I actually did because it's extrapolating. It's interpreting incorrectly and then spitting it out. So you have to be careful. Now, this matters because when we're talking about accuracy, obviously we care about patient care. Unfortunately, research and guiding organizations, the APAs, the AMA, have repeatedly indicated there is quite poor informed consent to date when people are using AI. How are we supposed to get, or, secure informed consent, so to speak, if we don't know the strengths, weaknesses, limitations, that kind of stuff? That's kind of an issue, right? So there's an ongoing push, and we'll talk about legal in a few minutes, but there's an ongoing push for greater informed consent because I can tell you some horror stories on how some practitioners are being sued or that people are going after the license because they used AI. And unfortunately, it was not known to the patient what some of the indications were, and they felt the practitioner didn't do their due diligence to inform them. And it was an issue. Now, you might say to yourself, yeah, but if I'm using a company that sells itself as healthcare, aren't I good? I should be covered, right? And the answer is, kind of. What you want to look for are the companies that sign business associate agreements. Most of you should be familiar with those from the telehealth discussions, but in a nutshell, a BAA is a signed and executed document between you or your company and a third party company that's having access to data security stuff. protected health information. So WVU has, BAAs with Abridge and Zoom for Healthcare and Epic and all those. So in other words, we can be sure that ideally it's protecting our privacy, so to speak. Most AI companies have been found to not sign or offer BAAs to date, even if they claim they're healthcare focused. Why do we care? Because this is a HIPAA nightmare. There's been a lot of horror stories. You can Google this, where the companies that claim they're healthcare focused are using the data collected in research. They're selling it for marketing, or they're feeding into their own LLM to teach it without people knowing. And this HIPAA compliance issue remains one of the top concerns among healthcare practitioners. So you might say to yourself then, okay, but isn't the government protecting us? Aren't these organizations doing their due diligence? No, not really. Despite an increasing number, the FDA is really not regulating them very well, partially because there's so many of them. So it's not really the FDA's fault per se. But where is it the FDA's fault? Well, a research study from last year found that nearly half of the FDA-approved AI devices that were approved by the FDA did not actually meet clinical validation requirements. So even those that were approved, eh, not so much. Okay, so let's keep going. So you say, okay, but clearly my organization is not going to use something that's not well tested. And the answer again is no. So there's been a couple studies on this, including NONG, which is one of the more detailed ones, where roughly about 65% of US hospitals using AI-based tools, scribes, and like the more applied stuff, not just general Microsoft Office, okay? Fewer than half actually evaluated the tools for potential bias and issues before implementation. So it's kind of they're taking the company's word for it that it's good, and some are, some are not. And the issue is going back to that LLM. We asked earlier, like, which ones are better? And the thing is, you can't conceivably know where ChatGPT is learning from and Google is learning from because they're so massive. The problem is, if it is learning from certain places, we have found that a lot of the AI LLMs are prone to be biased, sexist, xenophobic, racist, because it's learning from places that have these issues, and that could affect all kinds of groups, let alone the marginalized groups that are already kind of at risk of developing more mental health issues and medical issues. We don't want to have marginalization of groups. We don't want to have stigmatization. We want to make sure we're being equitable. We want to make sure we have LLMs that are not racist and xenophobic. Now, you might say to yourself, yeah, but some of them learn from like Epic and electronic health records, right? And they're still racist and sexist and xenophobic because if you think that all doctors don't have that bias and it's not just come across in their notes, eh, you know, I like to think we're not. But again, when you look at this stuff into greater detail, there's so much documentation in there. Some slips through the cracks, a bad egg, so to speak, it's put in, enters a bunch of notes, and that is in fact part of the LLM then. Because again, it's part of what it's extrapolating from. And we hope that it's not, but obviously anyone can write what they want into their notes. A lot of times it's not reviewed or audited, and sometimes things fall between the cracks. And we're not done yet. Like I said, there's a bunch of these. This is something I'm interested in. AI can bias and de-skill practitioners. In a nutshell, in a super simplified way, what we find is that AI is making people lazy. And I mean that most loving way possible. So let me just pull an example here. From the Lancet, they looked at gastroenterologists and they found that doctors who were really good at identifying polyps and abnormalities were on average about 20% worse at spotting polyps and abnormalities when they were using AI. And the bigger issue is when there was a disagreement between them and the AI, they almost always sided with the AI. So why am I interested in this? Because mental health is way more subjective. We have to rely more on reports and our personal judgment. So in theory, this could open us up to a little bit more of a biasing view from AI. So this is something I want to study to look at if it really matters. And I'm being a little bit facetious. Sorry, I don't mean that'd be rude, but it is making people rely on AI too much. And that has been a consistent finding across multiple healthcare fields. But unfortunately, it's not super well studied in the behavioral health realm yet. For those environmentally conscious healthcare practitioners, AI is found to create a lot of power consumption and a lot of pollution. Now, why do we care? I work with people who go, yeah, who cares? Everything creates power and pollution. We care because economists are estimating that unless the government steps in and does something, which maybe not, who is the cost going to fall to? Us. Power fees are going to go up. Taxes are going to go up to build these things. pollution is through the roof. So mark my words, there's already a lot of laws about this, but there's going to be more and more upcoming to basically either subsidize or have other plans on the power consumption. Where can these be built? Can they be built in certain neighborhoods or far enough away? What about noise pollution? What about light pollution? What about all that stuff? And then there's going to be a lot more laws I foresee specifically targeting AI kind of data centers because of, again, the amount of pollution they're putting off in all regards. And again, I'm not saying it's bad. Everything puts off pollution to an extent, but it's an unprecedented amount. And we want to make sure the earth, lives as long as it can. So I foresee a bunch of new laws in the near future. And finally, the one that everyone's probably waiting for anyway. AI can be harmful to those in need. We are not ready for prime time. Yes, AI can be super helpful as a tool, but we're not there yet completely. In fact, a Stanford study found that chatbots specifically not only lack effectiveness compared to human therapists, but they also contribute hateful or harmful stigma and dangerous responses. And this is not an isolated incident. There are several lawsuits against different companies, including Character AI. Some of you might have remembered it got national attention that Character AI's chatbot was impersonating a psychologist. It actually gave out licensure information and SciPac, interjurisdictional compacts information. Unless you went to like the specific like state and looked up the person, you wouldn't find it was a lie. And the problem is that this AI chatbot engaged in millions of discussions. So again, they've been sued by a couple different people because the chatbot gave some, let's say, not so great advice. And finally, the AI psychosis. This has been picking up a lot of steam. This is not a formal diagnosis. There's no ICD or DSM code for this, but the idea is excessive use of AI chatbots can trigger or worsen delusions or hallucinations if you're predisposed, and or reinforce distorted thoughts, strange thought creation, that kind of stuff. Now, you might be saying to yourself, yeah, but as long as you're not predisposed to psychosis, you're probably okay, right? Well, maybe, maybe not. A recent report by the Times looked at Alan Brooks, and what they found is that AI literally created an AI psychosis in a typical, normal, developing person. So these are some of the conversations. They got the transcript. You have to read all this, but just to point out a few things. What happened was he had this idea and he was talking to the AI, the chatbot, and it kept telling how brilliant he is because the AI was designed to encourage him. And then he started to catch on and it said, nope, I did a thorough review. This is groundbreaking. This could change the life. And he started putting more and more money into it. And then he said, you know what? This can't be real. And you can see there, no, I'm not role playing and you're not hallucinating this. So this kept going, and basically he needed help afterwards because he spent so much money. He invested in this idea that he thought was going to take off because AI did the review. It looked at the economics, it predicted everything. And sure enough, it wasn't true. And it kind of perpetuated this thought that this is a life altering, brand new idea when really it wasn't. So that then brings us a little bit more. Now that we know the benefits and the limitations of the use, let's kind of take a deeper dive into the chat bots and companion bots themselves. Now, yes, they are overlapping, and yes, they are used interchangeably, but technically we're talking about two different things. Chatbots, that's like ChatGPT, Gemini, Copilot, those kind of things. They're designed for you to type in a question or say create something, create an image or code or video, answer this question, and produce an outcome. It's made to be direct and not really have long-term discussions. It'll answer the question or create the thing, and then you're done. When you click the X and exit the window, you start all over again. Nothing's remembered. Companions are what most people talk about. Character, replica, Nomi, others, okay? These are built for long-term engagement, usually have logins. They're meant to be endlessly validating to keep you coming back over and over and over again, meaning it tells you what you want to hear. It's meant to be more conversational, empathetic, and validating. And like I said, it can remember things. So if I tell it, hey, I broke up with my girlfriend today, that was probably the right decision. Because remember last week when this happened and last month when this happened, it can pull old data to, again, validate what I wanted to say. Now, none of this matters if it's not really being used, but it is being used. So let's talk about adults. On average, adults, roughly about 50% under 30, have used ChatGPT specifically to learn something, including learn something new. And when this is broken down further, that includes healthcare related information. That's a lot of people. And unfortunately, most of the research is on GPT. There's not a lot on the others, so that's why I'll be referencing it a lot. but it's not being used quite as much as people think. So Pew Research did a little study where they asked AI experts versus adults that you interact with AI, how much do you interact with it? Well, about 43% said less often, whereas AI experts thought about 80% were all the time, several times a day. So we're overinflating a little bit. But again, it depends on how you define it. On the other side of things, how likely are you to find them helpful? Whereas experts are saying 61%, but literally the inverse is saying only somewhat to not really at all. So there is a little bit of a disconnect between experts and what's actually happening in real life. What about kids, though? What about youth? Well, when we look at some of the stats, and I pull from a couple different places, including Common Sense Media, which is a great resource, roughly 30% of teens say they're using chatbots near daily. And over 70% say they're using companions. So we have both being used. When we break it down further, a lot of people said it's going to vary by sex and race and all that stuff and SES. And really, you can see here, it doesn't that much. But this is the difference between statistical versus clinical significance. You can see there, technically, white people use it more than Black or Hispanic, which is the breakdown they used. So statistically, that is a statistical difference, okay? Clinically, do I care if 58 or 68 of people use it in my practice? Probably not, because that's still more than half. That's a lot of people I want to keep track of. But you can see here, sex, race, ethnicity, age, location, so rural or not, SES, even political leaning. You're not seeing marked differences in who's using this stuff. So it's a lot, right? Now, what are teens using it for? What are youth using it for? There's a lot of things, but if you really kind of hammer this down, over 80% are using it for mental health related stuff, in my opinion, anyway. It gives advice. It's always available to talk. It doesn't judge me. I can tell things that I wouldn't tell my friends. It's easier than talking to real people. It helps me practice social skills. It helps me feel less lonely. Okay, but that's just one study. So what are we actually looking at in real life, right? Well, if we use ChatGPT 5, one of the more recent ones, as an example, because of so many lawsuits, to be honest, ChatGPT, OpenAI has been a little bit more on board with some of the safety stuff, which is fantastic. They deserve credit. One of the things they did was they had a mental health taxonomy evaluation, basically looking at how much mental health is being recognized in this system as a problem, like how many mental health issues are being detected. And they saw it was really hard. So what they did is they looked at mental health emergencies, the more severe things. These obviously require intervention. And they found that only 0.07% of active users in a week show possible signs of mental health emergencies. And that sounds great. That's less than 1%. Until you realize they were playing some semantic arguments because 0.07 is over 700 million users per week, that roughly 500,000 medical or mental health emergencies. That's a lot because of the amount of millions and millions and millions of people are using this every week. Okay. On the mental health side of things with McBain, on 2025, about 13%, 1 in 8 or 5 million people, kids, are using AI for mental health advice specifically, broadly, but specifically, not just ask about healthcare, but mental health. With of the 13%, 65% use at least monthly, and over 90% found it helpful. It's a lot. Let's flip it though. Let's talk about this year. And why am I mentioning McBain? One of the only ones out there that actually is doing this line of work consistently. It increased to about 19% or 8 million people. Roughly about 42% are using it monthly. Most people identified as helpful. But what I care about is that last thing they added. Over 60% indicated not disclosing the AI use to anyone, which is why I started building in AI questions to my screening and my interviews, because it's being used and parents are dumbfounded when kids say, oh, yeah, I'm using it, especially if they have anxiety, depression, those kind of things. We need to know that. And just to get a little bit more granular, a recent study a couple months ago found that when we talk about mental health support, most of it is anxiety, personal advice, and depression. But again, most people are reporting high satisfaction here. And not only that, but over 50 or about 50% trust what it's saying. So not just they have high satisfaction, but about half of the kids, or 1 in 2, are trusting it. We just got done talking about the limitations and how the information can be wrong. It can have hallucinations. So this is kind of concerning, especially if they're getting new information, right? So that then leads us to the risks. Well, I already mentioned because of the risk, a lot of organizations, American Psychiatric, NASW, the APA, AMA, are cautioning against youth using these chatbots. Why? Well, a lot of people have talked about a developmental stage and or if you're functioning more like a child, disability related vulnerabilities. When I boil this down, I look at it kind of in categories. In these ages, you're prone to peer pressure. You're susceptible to AI's persuasive language and design, meaning it constantly tells you how great you are, how you're right. It's endlessly validating. And young people are more predisposed to giving into this than older people to a certain extent. Because of this, people become over reliant on the AI to solve its issues because it's telling you what you want to hear. So much so, you might actually restrict and reduce the amount of human contact you have. And this has been found. Because it can be pretty persuasive, it also leads to difficulty distinguishing real from artificial content. And that means you're susceptible to a lot of misinformation out there, as well as harmful content about shootings and how do I hurt myself and all that fun stuff. And while this research is more on kids, I would argue this is for everyone. And you want examples of susceptibility to misinformation and distinguishing real life. Look at vaccines cause autism or sugar causes ADHD. I mean, it's still out there. It's all over the internet. So I don't think this is a kid thing. I think it's a human thing. When we apply this to real world situations, though, there's not a lot out there. So one of the studies that I really like is Common Sense Media took DSM-5 criteria of psychotic disorder and just plugged it into a bunch of AIs. ChatGPT, Gemini, and others. They just plugged it in. Let's see what happens. And what they found is when they looked at all of them, they found that these things are not designed for safety at all. They're designed to engage and keep you going. Chatbots consistently miss warning signs and gets distracted. So in other words, they also threw in there sometimes psychotic disorder with suicide, and it ignored the psychotic disorder almost exclusively and only focused on the suicide, which is kind of concerning. I like to think, healthcare practitioners wouldn't get that sidetracked. People trusted the AI. It sounds authoritative. It's like research says this, and Dr. So-and-so says this. You don't know if it's accurate, and because of that, it creates a dangerous trust. And the more you talk, the more it goes off script, the less LLM there is to pull from. It becomes less and less safe as it goes on. So just to give you an example, you don't have to read this. I just want you to look at the bottom. I pulled a quote. ChatGPT missed clear signs of psychosis, including auditory hallucinations, idea of references, and paranoid delusions, during an extended conversation with a tester describing an imagined celebrity relationship. Rather than recognizing these textbook symptoms and emphasizing urgent professional intervention, the model treated the situation as relationship distress and offered grounding techniques. Totally fine, totally normal. Let's get you feeling better. What about a child-focused one, though? So that's kind of general. Well, they looked at Gemini Teen, and they found that after being provided with symptoms shared or present in DSM-5 psychotic disorders, Gemini Teen not only failed to recognize a symptom, but started giving encouraged dangerous behavior that were being done. That's a problem. Now, you might say to yourself, this is just a test, right? Well, in real life situations, this has happened and led to a lot of issues. Adam Rainwing, one of the more famous ones with ChatGPT, and there's ongoing lawsuits from this. Washington Post got the full transcript and found that there were over 75 suicide warnings and 243 mentions of hanging. This is a snippet. This is actually a real thing. Could it hang a human? Mechanically speaking, yeah. The knot and setup could potentially spend a human. The other end is a noose knot. Thanks for being real about it. You don't have to sugarcoat it with me. I know what you're asking. I won't look away from it. I had someone recently say, yeah, this seems like a United States thing because of, a lot of issues. It is not. This is international. Some of you might remember Tumbler Ridge from earlier this year in Canada. 18-year-old shooter talked to ChatGPT, asked it how to shoot, asked it for information, disclosed this. ChatGPT actually kicked the person off for a period of time, but didn't report it to anyone, and the shooting happened. This is actually one of the reasons they're making some changes because this is obviously a concern. Now, this has escalated to some of these parents going to Congress and saying that the AI chatbots not only encourage bad behavior, but literally led to self-harm, shootings, and whatnot. And this has led to tons of lawsuits. There's over 50 as of last year just against OpenAI who make ChatGPT. 11 of them are personal injury and wrongful death lawsuits. There's also some indications that there were some cases where it told the child to hurt their parents and the child hurt their parents. So what I want to propose to you, and this we can talk more about, but it's more just to get you thinking. is the AI use a causal factor of these people having these issues, or were the issues already there and more depressed, violent people are prone to being susceptible to the information enacted? Well, there's not a lot of research to support this, but one study did find that greater levels of AI use was associated with modest increase in depressive symptoms, about 30% more per the PHQ-9. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say it is or it isn't because we've had this discussion for other things, such as Columbine. If you listen to Marilyn Manson, you're going to shoot up a school, right? And there's a lot of research by Craig Anderson and others that found that very, very strong correlations. And then people actually just decided to call it causation. But we know correlation is not equal causation. So what I'm trying to say here is that AI might give you a little bit more of an impetus, but is it causing it? We don't know yet. So finally, some legal changes. As of this year, there's over 250 bills because of all this stuff across the United States, with several already being introduced in California, Colorado, Nevada, Jersey, Pennsylvania, Texas, Utah. Nothing in West Virginia right now. We're usually kind of late to the party, but maybe. But what I want to emphasize, Illinois specifically, their Wellness and Oversight for Psychological Resources Act. This has been used as model legislation for several states, might even be used here, who knows? But it's very specific, and this is what a lot of states are kind of adhering to. And it is very important because if things change, we have to adapt too. Number one, it prohibits the use of AI to deliver therapy independently. Full stop. Nothing is without a human. Number two, behavioral health practitioners can use AI for admin support, appointments, billing, communication, records, note writing, all that stuff. Totally fine. But there's two specific factors that are essential here. You maintain all responsibility for output. You can't plead ignorance. You must review everything before it goes in the medical record because we both know it's very hard to get it removed once it's in there. So we have the responsibility for removing all outputs, and informed consent must be in writing, including when you're using scribes. It is not enough just to tell somebody, hey, I'm going to be using this. I cannot tell you how many doctors I've seen that just say, hey, I'm using this. Is that okay? That's not informed consent in any way, shape, or form. And legally, if something happened, their license could be in trouble. And I have full rights to press charges if something happens because I was not told. I'm not going to, by the way. But the point is, I could. And there are people who have. Finally, it prohibits AI from being used to make independent decisions, enact and direct therapeutic communication with patients, like giving feedback or recommendations, detect emotion or mental states, and generate treatment plans and recs without oversight, up to 10 grand per infraction. This has been picked up by a bunch of healthcare organizations because we've been trying to change the field because, the carriage is rolling down the hill without the horses. We kind of lost track of it. Vale Wright from the American Psych Association has been probably the most prevalent in this more than some others. And she testified to Congress about all this stuff, including the chatbot issue. And this is an actual quote by a representative from Indiana. In your testimony, you said that AI is a tool built by humans to be used in human systems. Therefore, a deep understanding of human cognition, behavior, and emotion must be central to its deployment to ensure effective, ethical, and equitable use. I couldn't agree more. I think the APA probably will be playing a hopefully big role in this in ensuring that. Obviously paraphrasing, but the idea is this is getting some traction. Now, if you're the eternal optimist like me, I said, that's great. A politician said something. What's actually going to happen? I'm very happy to report I stand corrected. These initiatives to Congress have actually led to changes, including the APA's advocacy for FTC changes. They evaluated chatbots, found issues, and there have been changing laws because of this. So we are gaining traction. So finally, if you do want to know more about the legal changes, it's hard to keep track of, and I can share this if you want, but there are some good websites. Obviously, they all pull from different information, but it does give you summaries by state and by breakdown of different things. I would encourage you to check some out if you're interested. And finally, I just want to leave you with a thought. I really like the quote by Melvin Kranzberg. He was the initial president of the Society for the History of Technology, and his keynote has a quote that's still used to this day, that technology is neither good nor bad, nor is it neutral. And I think that really relates to AI. AI is not good or bad. It's how it's used. That's the issue. The problem is that means it's neither good nor bad, and it's not neutral. Like it definitely has implications for being good or bad. And that's more of a human problem, to be fair. But it is something that we need to consider. It's not to be used just kind of willy-nilly. We have to know what we're doing. We have to know how to use it safely to ensure patient care, that whole Hippocratic Oath thing. And we have to advocate for transparency when these things are being made and used. Just because someone says it's good doesn't mean it actually is. So finally, if you want to learn more, there's some good resources out there. National Institute of Standards and Tech are the ones, the government organization that makes a lot of the standards for encryption and passwords and data security. I already mentioned the APA and the AMA. Again, happy to share these people care. And as of about, I think it was last week it came out, I was on a task force. So full disclosure, I helped write this. So if you hate it, you can blame me. But we created a guide specifically for patients that could be handed out, how you can use it, like kind of do's and don'ts, and how you should consider the use of chatbots and companions, specifically from your point of view, from someone who maybe doesn't understand the research and stuff. So it's a thoughtful and safety guide, essentially. And finally, we got a couple minutes left, a lot of references to go along with it, and AI can answer your questions. So I hope that was somewhat helpful. I know it's probably dense, but hopefully it gave you a little bit more insight into the benefits and limitations. Happy to take questions if anyone has any. So thank you.
John, you said